Good morning, and it's another day, and it's actually
A hot day, which for September for us is great. Today we're going to do the Lordotic posture. We will be using the bar and a head cushion as usual for lying down, particularly for the Lordosis posture. You need all the help you can get for your spine, and a blue ball and a yellow band. You can still do this without any of those, but the reality is the person who's genuinely got an increase of Lordosis will need all the help they can get, because structurally these positions are very, very intense. The activation of the posture that's gone beyond a norm or is beyond a neutral, they're strong curves, they're strong muscles here that we're trying to pacify in order to get some kind of improvement and activation from other muscles. Without saying too much then, I'll add more with each part. We've got one of three again. This is the first part, 3 exercises. I might just slip a fourth in. We'll see how we go. But in terms of the standing, we'll always start with a squat, but there'll be a different emphasis for this because the person with an increase of Lordosis, and I've deliberately worn clothing today that allows you to see that if I stand without thinking too hard, I show really clearly that increased profile of the glute, which comes from the bigger hollow of the back, and tightness going on through the flexors. So the Lordotic that's mechanically Lordotic will have these big solid quads. If you think of an athlete who's a sprinter, you think of those Olympic athletes who are really power-based. They all have this profile, they're all Lordotic, but because they train in and out of their posture, they don't become a hostage to it, whereas a lot of us who aren't that elite or just aren't active, we end up in this kind of, really tightness here and here. And I often get a Lordotic posture through the door in their late 30s, 40s, because they've had an office job, they've had a seated life, and their lumbar curve, this increase of tension here, just becomes really, really tight. Anyway, find your squat position. I'm going to do sideways on so you can see. You don't necessarily need this, although it might give you more feedback as you understand this. Your feet are parallel and you're going down and up slowly because you're tuning into things that you maybe have missed. I know that since the sway back posture stuff, people at the studio have been asking me more questions. I will start to answer those and become really posture specific. Right now, does this exercise regime work for any posture? Of course it does. It's just that some of the things that a Lordotic has to think really hard about, you won't have to. They're still relevant to you, but you don't have to have the same kind of intensity in your thought process and mind-body connection. The next squat you go down into, stay down. Place the hands on the thigh bones and make sure your knees, as you know, should be backwards of the ankle joint or over it directly. The weight is to the outsides of the feet. And now we're aware of that Lordosis. Now, if I didn't correct my Lordosis, and this is what I see in the studio, you see this really big hollowed back, and I'm going to now give you activities that help you continuously find a way out of it. So the pelvic tilt for the Lordotic is a huge exercise because it's the targeted area of your lower spine that's got this too big a curve in. The exhale, the pelvic floor, pull down on your heels as it were, as you pull up on your pelvic floor. That flattens out the Lordosis, creating a lengthened curve. Inhale, breathe out and feel the curve. The tailbone goes back again, tailbone to the ceiling, and you feel quite happy there because you spend your life there. Exhaling though, you want to find your pelvic floor, internal obliques, not bum squeeze, to take you into this lengthened out curve. Now on a Lordotic, it's very hard to show a round lower back because for a Lordosis, when the posture has pelvic tilted, if you've got a naturally increased curve or anterior tilt, there on me is me really tucked under. Now if you measured the tailbone to the area, it's simply, but for me, for a Lordotic, that is a massive range of movement that's very corrective. So the next time the Lordotic finds that pelvic tilt, using pelvic floor navel spine, we're going to stay with the pelvic tilt and go down an inch and up an inch, learning to stabilize the abdominal area to support the Lordosis, therefore giving a rest to the back extensors that are overly active 98% of the time. And you're now working in what we call a neutral posture, therefore making the hamstring, back of the thigh, take responsibility for what it should be doing up to the tailbone, sitting bones, and the abdominal obliques supporting you rather than relying on the lumbar muscles. So the inhaling and exhaling, working purely in your neutral posture is what you're doing right now. The breathing in and out, you'll start to feel a greater activation of the muscles that lead up to here, go across from hip bone to hip bone, and then stay still. Now place your hands back onto your thighs, find your collarbones go wide. We're going to roll the pelvis to get you upright. So you breathe in, breathe out, pelvis tilts, 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 tilts. So now you're travelling the stretch of the lower back from tailbone to lower rib cage thoracic. And when you feel as though you've created that connection, the pubis draws under the belly button as it were, then slide the hands and the rest of the spine comes back, and you find you can now stand in a neutral posture. Using that neutral then, maybe use the bar or the chair. Do all of your squats in your neutral posture. If you don't think, it won't happen. And like no other posture, the core connection, pelvic floor, transverse wall, oblique connect, they're the muscles at the front of you that will stop the muscles at the back of you taking all of the load. The next time you go down and squat, you'll stay, and then we're going to roll you because this is a mobilizing moment. Pelvic tilt again on the breath out. Remember, out breath is always a flexion of the spine. Pelvic tilt, pelvic tilt, pelvic tilt. You feel as though all of the creases come to the middle part of the belly as the spine stretches, using the abdominal trunk muscles, and you're stood upright. Next exercise for the Lordotic is to get the quad lengthened. Go back to your squat, and then step whichever leg you want backwards, and it's the thigh that we're interested in. So here, wriggle around till you feel that you can get the back leg, the thigh, right under your hip bones. Definitely hold on to a piece of equipment because the effort for you to pelvic tilt out of your lordosis into your neutral is what you're looking at achieving. It's not about how far you go down on this one. It's about keeping the heel of the front leg, activating the hamstring glute on this leg. But this is your big boy here. The quadriceps on the lordosis posture are hugely tight at the hip bone end, and then they become tight at the knee joint end and they stop function there. So I've chosen a really active position. Don't be afraid of switching hands and getting a feel for what's going on. Depending on how tight you are, so your abdominals have to be strong to keep the pelvic tilt for you. The pelvic tilt simply puts you in neutral. And then the knee joint feels challenged as rectus femoris, that big thigh muscle that goes from the top of the hip bone down to the knee, is being asked to actively lengthen, okay? You're breathing, you've got blood flow, it feels like tight elastic, there's no pain, it's just taking a massive amount of thoughtfulness and core connection. Okay, last time, bring the legs together. That should be zinging with activation. Find your squat again and step your other leg back. Find your position and never be afraid of wriggling around to get your true position. This is a rehab activity. In other words, it will reorganize the posture. So the lordosis is often tight and steely. We need to make the areas that are tight and steely mobile and springy, okay? This is the first area, but we can't do this without having the core connect. Remember, if you're unsure, you can take yourself into pelvic tilts in this shape and make sure you really have found your neutral, otherwise you're working exactly where we're trying to not work. So the effort, straight down the quadricep, as you keep the pelvic floor drawn up, the navel to the spine, so you're not pulling the bum cheeks tight together, far from it. You want the pelvis to be free to be in neutral. The heel on this front leg can feel the ground. That helps the hamstring glute on the opposite side stabilize the pelvis as it should. So you'll feel maybe different from one side to the other. On my left thigh, I've had knee surgery twice now, broken ankle and torn hamstrings. So that left-hand side really knows where it's weak, and it's Great for the activity to make it long and strong, okay, and then let that go. So there are your legs actively woken up. Your next position will be on the floor, and we're going to use the blue ball, and we're going straight into your lying on your back, ready for what we call hip rolls. Some of you might think of it as a glute bridge. You don't need your head cushion, although you can have it because we're not rolling very high. It's a choice though. Whichever way, lie down, but most certainly make sure that you're level. So squiggle and wriggle, as I say, to get level. We're using a blue ball because the more activation you get from the inner thigh, it helps the legs contribute, because the inner thigh usually on the lordosis is relatively weak. My heels are pulling right under my knee joint. I check that my thigh bones are level, and it's the first exercise grounded, as it were. So use your breathing muscles to connect yourself to the ground. Without any changes, keep breathing, without any changes to alignment, the lordosis will have a huge gap. So if I pulled my clothing up, I, without any effort, have a gap going from my base of the scapula all the way. The waistband always gapes at the back because I've always got a huge gap in the lower back. And I'm all the way to my sacrum. Now the lordotic posture, therefore, is going to learn to breathe. First of all, the ribs down, and then gently rolling the hip pelvic area to an imprint. Stay and breathe in and out. This is the rule that really matters. As a lordosis, you can't leave your ribs out of it because the lordotic curve, or the lumbar spine, leads to the thoracic spine. It can never just be about pelvic tilting. It has to be about rib cage placement. All right, and inhale when you find that imprint, that pelvic tilt. Exhaling. Try and keep your ribs from flaring up in the air, adding to the curve that already exists. Breathe in. Breathing out, draw up on pelvic floor. Gently squeeze on that ball. You'll find it's easier if you do a gentle squeeze to get the adductor connected to the pelvic floor, and you flow to an imprint. You'll stay in your imprint and then you'll flow out of it. Use your breathing. If you don't get the deeper muscles through the breath, you won't ever change the lumbar intensity and the flexors. They really require the breath muscles to activate everything from the hip bones to your mid ribs. Exhaling then for your hip rolling to imprint with the rib cage placement, and stay. Breathe out again, pull on that ball a wee bit more, push your hands against the mat and roll one lumbar, 2, 3 lumbar vertebrae away. Don't go any higher than the base of the ribs, because already you'll find that you're working into some of your lordosis. So we roll down again. I can only describe this from my own understanding and practice. The pelvic floor has to activate. The pelvic tilt has to come through pelvic floor. You then feel, if you press through your heels, you'll get your hamstring contributing to shorten your here. If you let go at any point of the internal external oblique, you'll immediately go into your lordosis and increase the curve, and back down again we go. I don't teach full spine bridge to an early practitioner of Pilates who's lordotic. I only teach hip rolls because they tend to bypass and go straight to where their body thinks it should be, which is a real activation of the lumbar spine, the very opposite of what we need. Okay, you're just going to do a couple more of these rolling movements. My plan in part 1 is to start to free up the lumbar and the flexors, because without them being free, you're so strong in those areas, all the exercise I do with you will just blur and you'll do them as you've always done that. Whereas if you can get the feeling of movement without the bum squeezing, it's like WD-40 on the lower back and on this hip area here. So the working out that I give you will lead you to the hamstring, to the sit bone, and will lead you from the hip bone frontal to the base of the ribs as primary movers in and out of the postural lordosis. The next time you find yourself rolled down, stay rolled down and let that go. I'm going to remove the blue ball and you're going to put your head cushion under your head. Now this head cushion, if you then relax again, the head cushion will immediately help you bring the rib cage placement, therefore assisting the position of the spine as being a better position in terms of training it to be more neutral and out of the overactive imbalanced muscles. We're using a yellow band. You'll bring your knees in, put the feet around the band, but take time to get your band straight, whatever that means, and definitely have your heels as well into that band. The band wants to be around the feet, there's tightness on the band. You walk your hands to the place where you feel that you can bend at your elbow. You've got your hands by the sides of your knees, and here we go. You start your breathing, you're in tabletop, you're breathing in and out, and on the exhale, you're going to add to the imprint of the lumbar. The legs will go nowhere. Breathe in, and then breathe out and release it away again. You'll find very easily you can tip and tilt your pelvis. Exhaling, legs go nowhere. So we're back to mobilizing in a position that stops the flexors working. Because we're holding this yellow band, we're stopping the hip flexors be the kind of dominant sense and allowing the internal external oblique, just think of abdominals, to work as hard and hopefully one day harder than the hip flexors. The hip flexors will always be primary if you never build up your core strength, and on a Lordotic it's most certainly an imprint. So I've got my imprint of my lumbar, and I'm now going to breathe out and imprint more of the high part of the lumbar and back down. You'll only get that by rolling the shoulder blades off, bending the elbows as you curl up, and inhaling back down. So my elbows pull forwards and they assist the range of movement of the lower thoracic area. In other words, below the scapula, and I call it high waist imprint. You must get the high waist imprint, otherwise the lumbar spine doesn't connect with the upper part of the spine. No part of the spine is a separate entity. It's just a description of where the curve should be, where the biomechanical forces want to use the curves appropriately. Use your breath out to curl and use your breathing in to uncurl. Now the next time I curl, I'm going to stay and breathe in 2, 3, 4, 5 and out 2, 3, 4, 5. Pointing my nose to my navel, shrinking my abdominals in. Inhaling into the side of the rib cage. My belly never balloons up with air because I'm using transverse, pelvic floor, navel to spine, in and out with the breath. The breathing muscles are training to shorten at the lower end. So the pelvic tilt in a Lordotic shortens the fibres of rec fem and internal obliques from the lower end of the trunk. Okay, inhaling and exhaling. Inhaling and exhaling. And then I'm going to push my heels to the ceiling and pull my elbows down, put my head down. This is the final breathing action. Go back to breathing in and out. Now the Lordotic should be able to get straight legs, because usually the hamstring, so my legs can go all the way back here, because the hamstring on the Lordosis posture is long, but is not strong. It's usually so lengthened and tight that it's quite happily snaps, not snaps, but can tear at the tailbone end with the wrong force. Go back to your pelvic tilts. Inhaling and. When you do the pelvic tilt, feel the abdominals compressing down away from your clothing and into your high and mid waist compression to the floor. No glutes working. Pelvic floor, navel to spine. And the yellow band is helping your hip flexor be pacified to give chance to other muscles that are more useful getting involved. Now I'm going to pelvic tilt again and pull myself up in the direction that I was in earlier. My hands are still by my thighs and I'm going down again. Exhaling. As I gently pull on that band, it's helping me stay in an imprint and then add to that imprint the rib cage flexing and inhaling down. There's no point doing this and just throwing yourself up and down. You're inviting the breath to involve the top end of your abdominal rib cage to waistband area working, and therefore that part of the spine behind it lengthening. Okay, it's the last time. Breathe in 2, 3, 4, out 2, 3, 4, nose to navel. Legs are both identical in terms of their length and alignment, and you can feel your sacrum to the floor. You can feel your waistband being drawn down through the abdominals. One more moment here with the lengthening of the breath, and then pull your knees into your chest. So this is your stretch. The other thing about the lordosis is it loves to be supported in the lower back stretch. That helps it pacify the overly active area, and I'm just rocking it side to side. It's all we've got time for in this part, so parts 1 to 3. Parts 1 to 3, therefore, are all about mobilising you so that the area where we need corrections can get involved. If we don't silence and lengthen you from the hip bone to the quad and over the knee joint, and if we don't silence and lengthen this lordosis here, we can't train the muscles that will take you away from a dominant increase of your lumbar spine and a dominant activation against the flexors. Tune in again tomorrow. The workout will get a little bit more intense, but don't be deceived. Without doing what I've just done with you, you can't really progress your posture. So by all means do this tomorrow morning and then tune in for what I add to it, because it'll take you to more strength work. Anyway, great to see you, I presume online. And apart from that, ask me questions. I'm more than happy to feedback, and also ask questions of information that you'd like to be part of the video. I'm more than happy to answer. Great, have a lovely day. It's sunny. We'll see you again soon. Goodbye.